This is a 2004 Ferrari 360 Challenge Stradale, and it's one of the coolest modern Ferrari models. This was the limited edition high-performance version of the regular Ferrari 360, and it paved the way for the 458 Speciale and the 488 Pista that came later. Today, I'm going to review the Challenge Stradale and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this 360 Challenge Stradale is currently for sale, being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is a truly special car, limited edition, high performance, and this one has only 11,000 miles, and it's the color combination everyone wants, red with the red interior and the factory stripe. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to head over to the live auction for this Challenge Stradale, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the 360 Challenge Stradale with a little overview of exactly what this car is. Now, like I said, this is the high-performance version of the regular Ferrari 360. That was sold from 1999 to 2004 for the coupes, and there were some convertible spiders in 2005. This came at the very end of coupe production in 2004. The idea was to make a special limited edition performance-focused model right at the end to eke some extra sales out of a declining model before a new one came out. Now, a lot of enthusiasts think that the Challenge Stradale was the first time Ferrari tried something like this in one of their V8 mid-engine cars, but they had actually done a similar version of the 348. It was called the GT Competizione, and it also came out at the very end of production, and it was a high-performance track-focused model limited to just 50 units. So it was incredibly rare, incredibly low volume. It wasn't really a big splash. So for the next Ferrari model, the 355, they didn't make a car like this, and they decided to revive it with the 360. This time, however, it was a massive success. The Challenge Stradale was incredibly sought after and very desirable, but because it was at the end of production, Ferrari couldn't really make them for all that long, and so they didn't really make all that many. Only around 1,300 of these were built, which makes this about as rare as an F40. It is a very special, very rare limited production Ferrari. And in fact, I kind of think the success of this car surprised Ferrari. I don't think they thought there'd be as much demand as there was for a limited edition track-focused version of the 360, but a lot of people wanted one. And so for the next model, the 430, they did it again, the 430 Scuderia, which they made in much larger numbers, and they even made a convertible version called the 16M. Then they did it again for the 458, the Speciale, and a convertible of that, the Speciale A, and then the 488 came out with the Pista, and production numbers went much, much bigger, but it kind of started with this car in a low volume just so Ferrari could prove that the concept worked, and it did. So, you might be wondering what changed. What exactly did Ferrari change from the regular 360 to turn it into the high-performance Challenge Stradale? I always knew there were some upgrades, better suspension, steering, throttle response, but I didn't realize how extensive the changes were until I started researching for this video. Let's start with the powertrain. Same V8 from the regular 360, of course, but it was boosted by 25 horsepower. Regular 360 had 400, this had 425. Unfortunately, the torque figure didn't change, only 275 pound-feet of torque. Not all that much, but acceleration was pretty strong. This car did 0 to 60 in the 3.9 to 4.1 second range, so it was pretty quick, especially for 20 years ago. But they changed a lot more than that. In fact, basically all of the important performance components. The brakes were beefed up. Carbon ceramic brakes were standard on the Challenge Stradale, and the front brakes were lifted straight off the Enzo, which was of course Ferrari's flagship model at the time. Steering response was improved for quicker inputs, of course, and throttle response was also improved, so when you stepped on the pedal, it went quicker. The Challenge Stradale also included a handling package that improved the car's handling. That meant stiffer suspension, upgraded components, including some from the Ferrari 360 Challenge race car, put into the road car for better handling. But the other big story with the Challenge Stradale was weight savings. Depending on how you equip this car, you could save up to 265 pounds of weight off the standard 360, which is obviously a tremendously impressive figure. Now, doing that required you to get plexiglass windows with like window sliders instead of ones that would roll down into the door. And I don't even think that option was offered here in North America for regulation reasons, and most people didn't get it even when it was. Plus, maximizing the weight reduction also meant that you had to ditch the radio, and most people didn't do that either. But the windows and the radio together saved 66 pounds, which means if you got all the other weight saving stuff, but you skipped those for comfort and convenience, you still were saving about 200 pounds in weight compared to the standard 360. So where did they pull it out? One answer is body panels. The front bumper and the side skirts in the Challenge Stradale are different from the regular 360. They're made of some resin composite material that was lighter weight, and that helped keep weight down. This car also made extensive use of carbon fiber, and I'll show you some of that throughout the car as I tour you around the quirks and features. And it had lighter weight seats compared to the standard 360, less comfortable, more race focused, and just lighter. In addition to that, the engine, transmission, powertrain area was about 25 pounds lighter than the regular 360. Most of that was due to a lighter exhaust, but still, you save some weight in the engine bay as well. Now, the result of all this weight savings was, in its lightest form, the Challenge Stradale weighed only 2,820 pounds, give or take, which is incredibly light by modern exotic car standards. Exotics have gotten much heavier, much bigger over the years. This car was definitely one of the last cool, exciting performance cars to crack the 3,000 pounds barrier. It really was lightweight, and they really did save a lot of weight compared to the regular car. So this car had more power than a standard 360, it weighed less, and it had improvements to the brakes, the suspension, the steering, and the throttle response. Pretty much everything you'd want was upgraded, and then there was the cool cosmetic stuff. And there's actually quite a bit of it, and it was pretty cool. Let's start with the wheels. This car has these, well, they call them Challenge wheels because they look like the wheels on the Ferrari Challenge race cars, and they kind of made their debut on the 360 Challenge Stradale. These were 19-inch wheels compared to the standard 360, which had these 18-inch 5-spoke star wheels that everybody knows so well from this car. Now up front, making the front bumper out of a lighter material than what you had in the regular 360 also gave them the chance to restyle it, and that's what they did. It's a little bit more sculpted, a little bit more aggressive. Frankly, it just looks cooler than the one in the regular car. Same deal with the side skirts. These were also lighter weight than what you got in the standard 360, and so they decided to change the look of them. They flare out at the ends toward the front wheel and the rear wheel, which makes the car seem visually more aggressive and lower. Now, the suspension changes to the Challenge Stradale also lowered the car to make it closer to the ground, handle better, but these updated side skirts really help to accentuate that lowered look with the flares out at the end. And I think even though it's a small detail, it's a crucial one on the Challenge Stradale. Another upgrade for the Stradale came in back where you had a rear spoiler. You might be looking for it, you can't really see it. It's this little hump that comes up in back. The regular 360 didn't really have anything, and the Stradale's isn't exactly huge, but it's there, a little extra rear spoiler to highlight that this car was a little extra special. Now, also around back, you can see the grille, the rear grille is this black metal mesh. That was also an upgrade for the Challenge Stradale. The standard 360 had a painted body color rear grille, didn't really look all that great. The Challenge grille, as they called it, was optional in the standard car, but it was standard on the Challenge Stradale, and that's what you see here. Also optional on the regular 360, but standard on the Stradale, the fender shields. This was like Ferrari's race car symbol. They put them on some special road cars if you pay more, but on this car, they put them on standard. Now, also in this vicinity is another big upgrade to the Challenge Stradale, and that was the mirrors. These cars had carbon fiber mirrors instead of body color painted like on the regular 360. If you're looking at a 360 and you can't quite tell if it's a Challenge Stradale, maybe they modified a regular car, the mirrors are a pretty surefire way to know, because changing out standard mirrors for carbon fiber mirrors is tremendously expensive. So this was a distinctive feature of the Challenge Stradale, and it's just some of the carbon fiber that they used. Another carbon fiber addition that the regular car didn't have came on the rear glass. Looking into the engine bay, you can see carbon fiber kind of lining all the sides of it. It's sort of rimmed in carbon fiber, and you had these little holes on the sides that was also distinctive to the Challenge Stradale. So a little bit of extra carbon fiber on the outside. And since we're still talking about things around back, you also had a little Challenge Stradale badge back there. Just in case you couldn't tell from all the other changes that it's a Challenge Stradale, well, you have the badge to show for it. But probably the most iconic and notable change to the Challenge Stradale over the regular car was the stripe running down the middle. Ferrari doesn't usually put stripes on its cars. It's not common, and they only do it by special request if you pay them a lot of money. But the Challenge Stradale offered a stripe from the factory that went down the center of the car, and you can see it here. Now, reports that I read differ on whether this stripe is painted on, which I had always heard, or it's a vinyl applied under the clear coat, which I also read in a few places. But regardless, it was an option, and it has become a very desired one, because it was another major thing to set this car apart from the regular 360, and it was kind of a special thing they did just for the Stradale. Ferrari and stripes don't usually mix for road cars, so having the optional stripe now is a desirable benefit if you're looking for or want to own a Challenge Stradale. But anyway, next we climb inside the Challenge Stradale, where we instantly notice that the interior is dramatically different from the one in the 360. Way different than the exterior, which has quite a few changes. You see that the moment you open the door, and the door panel has no leather, no stitching. It's just a big carbon fiber piece with like a grab handle and a pull handle to open it. That's it. No luxuries here. And that theme continues through this interior. There is no leather, no beautiful leather hand stitching or colored piping anywhere in this interior like you would see in a fine Ferrari model from this era. Instead, it was all about performance. So what did they do in place of all that leather? The answer is, well, mainly Alcantara. You can see the dash is completely finished in Alcantara. And this car had a black upper dash and a red lower dash, including Alcantara even going around the radio box in the center control stack. It's all Alcantara in here. Now, that also carries over to the seats. You can see fully covered in Alcantara instead of leather like you might expect from a Ferrari model from this era. So why the use of Alcantara? A few reasons. Number one, it's lighter. So this is the lightweight performance model. That makes sense. Number two, reduces glare compared to leather. The upper part of this dashboard in black has less glare with Alcantara than leather, which will be beneficial on the racetrack. And for the seats, it just keeps you in place better. So you're not sliding around going through hard corners. Alcantara is grippier. There's more friction, so you don't move around. And the seats themselves also help with that. You can see these are high performance bucket seats. They're pretty tight around your butt and around your back to keep you from moving around on the track. And they even have holes near the headrest so you can put in a racing seatbelt if you wanted to. Now, I think that was actually an option on this car in other markets, but in the States, for regulatory reasons, automakers can't sell cars with racing belts. But the holes are there in case you want to put on a belt for track use. Now, beyond the Alcantara, there were some other interesting materials in this car. The ceiling is not leather or Alcantara, but instead sort of a mesh, which is a little bit odd, but a lightweight, non-luxury material. But the floors are probably the most interesting part. No carpeted floor mats in here. Instead, you just have a rubber surface in some part of it and nothing in other parts. Instead, you have completely exposed welds in the floorboard area of this car, which is not something you'd associate with high-quality luxury Ferrari. But this car was all about removing stuff, and so things got exposed you wouldn't normally see. There's no sound deadening in here, no excess carpeting. It was all intended to be lightweight, to make it faster. Now, another revision compared to the standard 360 is the center console, which is completely different from the one in the regular car. They didn't just carry it over and modify it, they changed it entirely. You can see it's all carbon fiber, which wasn't a thing in the regular 360, but they've changed everything else too. You can see they've lost the ashtray, you wouldn't need that in a car like this, and they've added a few interesting buttons. For one, you have LC, which in my world stands for Land Cruiser, but in this car, it stands for Launch Control. This is one of the very first Ferraris to have it, a launch control feature. You also have a button here marked ASR with a line through it, which would turn off a form of traction control, and you have a button here for reverse. You can press that and get into reverse. This was very different from the standard 360, where there was a little joystick lever sticking up that you would lift and pull back, and that would put you in reverse. Here, it was a simple button. But probably the most interesting buttons up here. For one, a giant red start button in the center, as you can see. So you put in the key, you turn it, and then you push start. That was different from the regular 360 where you just put in the key and turn it and it would start. The era of start buttons was appearing when this car came out, and so Ferrari jumped on that trend. Also notable in this car, you have a race button, which you didn't have in the regular 360, and that's because the drive modes were done a little bit differently for this car. So the standard 360 was regular mode, but there was a sport button you could push to go into sport mode. In this car, that sport mode was the regular mode, and then you could push this race button to go into race mode. So this car came standard with sport mode, and race mode was a step up from that. And in fact, to the left of the steering wheel, you can see a few switches over here, but there's a blank in the middle. That's where the sport switch is on the regular 360. For this car, they just pulled it out, and instead, you have that race button in the middle. Now, also in the center console, you can see a little plaque that says Challenge Stradale, reminding you of just how special your car is. Now, it's also worth noting that another change to this interior was the addition of more carbon fiber, just like you saw outside. So these little circular dials around the climate control vents are carbon fiber, and you can move them to open or close the vents to restrict or permit airflow. Now, below that, you have carbon fiber trim around the climate controls themselves, a little bit more carbon fiber in here, and you can see it in other places too. I mentioned the door panel is this one big carbon fiber panel. That's probably the most obvious, but a little bit of carbon added for some additional weight savings in here. Now, also notable, another change to this interior came to the gauge cluster, where the center dial was now yellow, which wasn't true on the regular 360, and it now revved to 10,000 RPM, or at least it showed that at the top of the tack, which was a change for this car and this powertrain upgrade. Another interesting upgrade to the Challenge Stradale that most people don't know about, the shift paddles. The one on the right is larger than the one on the left. You can see right next to each other, the right paddle, upshift, is larger than the left downshift paddle, which also wasn't true in the regular car. They did that in the Challenge Stradale because they wanted to give you more paddle to pull so that you had an easier spot to grab when you were accelerating out of a corner on the racetrack and you went to upshift. They gave you more upshift paddle zone, and they didn't do it for the downshift paddle, and that's why they're different only on the Challenge Stradale. And yes, shift paddles for this car. Unfortunately, you don't have a 3-pedal manual transmission. At this point in Ferrari's life, they were transitioning from manual to automatics, and F1 was a little bit faster than a traditional manual. This car was all about on-track performance, so all Challenge Stradale models have automatic transmissions. Personally, I think this is a bit of a shame, and I think this car would be valued significantly higher on the used market if there were manuals, but none of them are. Now, the benefit was it was a quick shifting F1 automatic, quicker than the standard car. Like I said, they tightened up the shifts to make it faster, just like basically everything else with this car, but it's not 3 pedals. There have been a few conversions done, but none were ever factory done by Ferrari. And finally, we move on to the front trunk of the Challenge Stradale, which I don't actually think was any different from the front trunk of the standard 360, but I might as well cover it anyway. It's actually pretty large. You can get a decent amount of stuff in here if you want to take your Challenge Stradale on a little road trip, and there's a couple of neat goodies. This little bag in the back, strapped in with leather straps, that's a tire inflator kit, nothing too unusual there, but this bag in the front, this leather luggage piece, that's a toolkit. And you open it up and it's surprisingly comprehensive. There's a lot of tools in here and other stuff like fuses, a belt, relatively useful things in case you want to do some roadside DIY maintenance on your Challenge Stradale. Ferrari still has tools in its new cars, but they've scaled way back on what they're including. This is one of the last cars to have a full leather, like suitcase style toolkit in the car. Also worth noting, in the front trunk, I have always loved the little emergency release handle to get out, because the image on it isn't just a person climbing out of a regular car, they're climbing out of a sports car. Even though this will only be used by someone being kidnapped, Ferrari still had to make it model correct, which I love. All right, driving the 360 Challenge Stradale. Now, I owned a Ferrari 360 for a while, and so I'm actually a pretty good person to give some insight onto this car because I can tell you just how different it is. And one of the first things you notice when you drive this car is it feels a lot more legit than a regular 360. Now, I liked my 360, it was fine, but it was a sports car. This feels like a more raw, exotic car. Like, this is a very different feel, different animal. You feel that the moment you start the car, the exhaust is louder, you can hear that instantly, and then also you're lower, there's no sound deadening in here. I'm hearing all these little pebbles and sand particles knock up and hit the undercarriage of the car, which a normal car drowns out, but not this one. It's harsher, the ride is rougher, the seat is harder, the interior isn't covered in like nice luxury materials. Everything is just more focused, and you can tell that instantly. And I think that's probably the coolest thing about this car, just how raw and exotic it was, that combined with incredibly low production numbers. So most sources say only 1,288 1288 of these were built, which makes this just as rare as Carrera GT and rarer than F40. That is pretty amazing. Now, people will say, oh, well, it's based on a 360, so it's not as special, you know, as an actually full low volume car. But this car was just so damn different from a 360. And actually, I think that one of the big flaws, one of the big disappointments about the Challenge Stradale is that it was based on a 360, and so people underestimate it. People are like, oh, the 360, it was a fairly pedestrian car, they made a zillion of them, blah, blah, blah. But this is like nothing like a regular 360. Now, the other drawback of the Challenge Stradale that everybody talks about, of course, is the transmission. It is generally agreed that the transmission, you know, in retrospect, it was a mistake. They were just going off manuals. It would have been cool if they had done this as a manual-focused exotic performance car, but they didn't. I have a bit of an interesting take on that, and I've mentioned it in a couple videos now, and I actually have started to come around on the F1 transmission, which has been universally decried and complained about by a lot of people. But one interesting thing is it just feels so mechanical. And it doesn't feel as mechanical as a manual transmission, of course, but it's so much more mechanical than a modern dual clutch automatic. And so when you drive this car, it has kind of a cool mechanical feel to it. And I always thought I would complain about F1 for the rest of my life, but actually, as time has gone on, I've started to kind of appreciate the mechanical feel of the F1 transmission. Now, this isn't to say I don't wish this car had a manual. Of course I wish it had a manual. But aside from the transmission, I just want to underscore, this car is unbelievable when you start to drive it, and I really barely can scarcely believe that it has any basis on a regular 360. The steering in a regular 360 is, to put it mildly, light. That was a complaint of the 355, and it continued with the 360. This car is dramatically better. The steering feel is heavier, the steering response is more precise and quicker. It's obviously not as fast as like a Pista or a modern exotic sports car, but it's a lot faster than you would expect for a car based on the 360, which dynamically I was never obsessed with. Beyond that, you have the handling, which also feels amazing. The suspension changes to this car were great. Now, I never complained about the handling in my 360. I always thought that was pretty good, but that was also early in my career before I had driven a lot of cars, and over time I've come to realize it was fine, but it could have been a little stiffer sprung. It could have provided a little bit more confidence in the corners, and this car solves both of those problems. And frankly, I think it looks a lot better. The 360 is aging fine, it looks okay, but this car, the focused look of it, the performance, the lowered, the side skirts, all of it adds up for just a much more impressive everything. And I think this car is Even at its current values, which have never really declined, it's always been appreciated, I still think it's more underappreciated than you might think, just because it's so rare and so focused, and it kind of was responsible for, in a way, starting a tradition in the Ferrari world that has continued and expanded since this car. And so that's the 2004 Ferrari 360 Challenge Stradale. This is a truly special and impressive car. Some fantastic upgrades over the regular model, extra power, better track performance, and incredibly limited edition. Far more limited than the special high-performance Ferrari models that came later. I have always wanted to review a 360 Challenge Stradale, and I'm thrilled that I finally had the chance, and you can buy this one on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give the Challenge Stradale a Doug score.
And the Doug score is here, 62 out of 100, which puts the 360 Challenge Stradale here against some relevant cars. Frankly, I think this is exactly where it belongs, tying the 996 Porsche 911 GT2, probably its closest rival and my favorite Porsche 911 model ever. The 360 Challenge Stradale is a seriously exciting car with truly impressive rarity and performance, and the market has always gone crazy for these, rightfully so, as this is a special car that makes a tremendous improvement over a standard 360.